Melissa, that view right there seems to be the best.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Let me switch back to it. I was a senior build and release engineer for Sonic Solutions in Novato, California for 2 years, but overall I have over 8 years of experience. Now, what you might be asking yourself is, what is a release engineer? Wiki and I defined it, as you can see, as a subdiscipline in software engineering. It's concerned with compilation, assembly, and delivery of source code. But in reality, it's the management of the lifeline of a company, the source code, the files that a developer writes and then checks in. If you've ever used something like SharePoint, same idea. You're creating files, you're checking them into a system, and you have to maintain these files until you give them to someone, you archive them, whatever you're going to do with them. So whether you're in library science and you're looking to hold on to books, or you're in archival and you're looking to hold on to records, or in my case, I was looking to hold on to source code. It's kind of like the hub of a company. We act as gatekeepers. We keep bad stuff from going out of development and QA into the world. And we make sure that we're producing reliable, reproducible software. Just so you have a better idea of what source control and version control are, it's actually literally a repository where we store the files, or anything that is a high-value asset. It could be documentation. You can actually use it for when you're defining the GUID. You can put the GUID shots in there. You can use it for finance that has to do with a product. It depends on the company how extensive they want to make the information and how robust they want to make the line of support documentation that goes along with the source code. Some companies have really good plans. Some companies have really bad plans. The really good companies have code lines that are well documented, that have all the support information from project plans to project documentation to finance to emails to the source code, everything. But the big thing about the source control is that not only can we store everything in there, but we can control who sees it, whether they can actually check the file out, which means they can take the file and actually edit it, and once they have it, whether they can check it back in. I can get so specific on this that I can run scripts that say, that's nice, you wanted to check that in, but until your manager reviews your check-in, it's not really committed to my code line, and you're in sort of this status of pending. It's a very, very controlled environment, or if you have very few developers or very few personnel, then it's a very loose, open environment. Labels and tags, this is the metadata that we attach, believe it or not, to files. So it refers to really important snapshots in time. Now here again, really good shops have great labels and tags. They're definitive in the information that they're conveying to the users. They'll tell you that it was a build number whatever, 222, and it was just a daily build, versus this was a releasable build. This is something that we sent out to a customer. And it's important to have these because it allows a build engineer like myself or anybody to go back at any moment, use that metadata, pull up the exact list of files that were incorporated in that view, and use those files to see, was something improperly put in there? Was there a bad check-in? Maybe somehow your media got corrupted and you need to reproduce it. It allows you real control over what's happened. But if you have bad tags, then as subsequent build engineers come in, because at least in the software engineering field, people last 2 to 4 years, if you have bad tags, then you don't know what what was going on. And I've been in shops where the metadata that went along with these tags was awful. And the comments that you could add to the metadata for even further review were non-existent. So you were left kind of going, and what were they doing and why were they doing this? So we see how important, again, just like when we're creating a taxonomy or a folksonomy, how important it is to create things that people understand moving forward. Change list. This is an interesting topic. Change lists identify the list of files. So when I go and I want to see the source at any particular change, I can see every file that was included in that. So again, it offers me the control of seeing that I had version number 22 of Sarah's Word document, and I had version number 44 of Christina's student roster, and this is what comprised tonight's meeting, we'll say. And it's every time I check those files back into control, I get a new change list, and it's going to have my name, it's going to have the version of all those files, it's going to have any comments I want to make. And again, in a good shop, then we insist that developers put information into this, including bug fixes, including email, references to emails. Sometimes there's an external system that's used to assign work to engineers, and these systems have their own tracking and task numbers. So in a change list, when you commit it back to your repository, you would include information like the tracking ID so that you can see further information to support your work that you've been doing. Now this is the one thing that might be really a strange ideal to people, is the idea of branching. So you probably think of these things as being in a linear line of I'm just checking in all these files. But in a software shop, you actually have to branch these, and I would manage multiple copies of source code documentation and everything else. The reason we did this was simple. You had a line that people could break, literally. You had a line that special development was going on in. You had release lines. So these were, say, a week before your newest copy of Illuminate was going to go out live. You would branch it. You would say, if you touch this, if you break this, your manager is going to come down and have a very long chat with you, and it's not going to be a pleasant one. And everything that would be checked into that line would just be scrutinized to the T. And at the end of it, I would create metadata, a label, and I would put it on there, and it would include every single file that went out. Now the reason we did this is because, as always, when we'll call our product again Illuminate had a bug, I needed to know where to send the developer to work and fix it. So the developer would go back to that release line, not to where all the new stuff was going on, but to the actual line where the product that was released was going on. They'd make their fixes, they'd create their change list, and we would gather that up and we would apply a new label that said, here's for the patch that we've created. So there's a lot of information that's flowing back and forth, and if you architect it badly, you can't follow it, you can't document it, you can't provide any reliability. The tools, there's a lot of different tools that can be used for this. And they're not just used, like I said, for source code, because you could use them in finance, you could technically use it in a library if you wanted to. The tool that a lot of people use is called Perforce. The number one reason Perforce came on the market and got such a huge market share was cost. They were so cost effective it wasn't funny. And the second thing was that they were fast. They were cross-platform, so initially they had some issues with Unix platforms, but they became cross-platform, which was a big deal. They were scalable. They could go from 2 users to 4,000 users, and they could handle it all. they supported distributed development, because one of the things is obviously the idea is that if I want to work on a file and Patricia wants to work on a file and Chris wants to work on a file, how do you do that without everybody stepping on each other's toes? And that's the whole point of all the versions. It allows each of us to check it out. And then as we check the file back in, it uses, as we see here, it uses IDEs such as Visual Studio and Eclipse to actually create merges. So it allows you to see the changes that each individual has done and then to merge your information back together and check in a copy, so that I don't just go in and check it in and wipe out whatever Chris did, and then Chris comes along and wipes out whatever Sarah did. We can see each change. I mean, it offers you such control over your files and such detailed information that if you really want to know what's going on with the information you're keeping, these are the tools you keep. They had a really good track record of performing well for different companies. So right after they hit the market, a lot of people stepped away from the products that were on the table because they were costly. I mean, they were just, the licensing was outrageous for them. And Perforce was so cheap, and they made their mark by being reliable and scalable, and they have just flourished in the marketplace. But really the idea is that, you know, believe it or not, it was all about architecting our information and documenting it, because I've been in shops that were great and did that. And at my last place of work, I walked into a shop where 2 months later I was scratching my head and wondering how they did anything, because the flow of information, the metadata we should have been gathering, the tagging that should have been going on, it just didn't happen. And the truth was is they were putting out a lot of unreliable, bad software. And so your skills that you learn in architecting information, and if you get technical enough, can actually be used and applied in a field such as release engineering. You can go in and help them map their processes. You can help the engineers develop processes for how they do their work, how they check them in, because they're lovely people, but they're bad offenders of trying to subvert the system and go around it because they don't want to be bothered with check-ins. But you, as an information professional, can actually guide them on best practices of getting their information in there, capturing what is going to be the money for the company down the road. It's always important to be able to look back and know, why did they do that? How did they do that? And when did they do that? So you really possess a lot of skills that can be laid onto software engineering, and I hope that helped you understand build and release engineering. I tried to keep it short because it's a big topic. And thanks for everyone for listening, and a special thank you to Wiki and Perforce for definitions. Oh, any questions?
Hey, Melissa, that was a great presentation. Really interesting. I used to work in an engineering company, and so I never worked in like big software projects, but we did a lot of version control, but just using more built-in in-house tools for version control for engineering files that I was working with. I was curious, you know, just out of curiosity, some of these shops that you've worked in and the software products that were managed this way, how many, you know, for a typical sort of software product, how many file assets would you be keeping track of in the version control software?
Depends on how big the project is and how many products they have, but it could be hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands, and then every single one of them, you end up with a delta of those. So you could end up with probably millions of files that you're in charge of and you're responsible for. And a lot of people get into release engineering, and a lot of people get out really quick because the demands of doing it, it's really stressful. I mean, if you're not set up to deal with the stress of having that much responsibility on your head, then they run away from it. But it can be millions of files.
Melissa, you did such a great job. I am so happy that you did this, and I want to thank you very much for being our first to speak. Yeah, you really did set the bar high, Melissa. And I just want to say that I was so interested to hear that there is such a large metadata and document management aspect to the software world. I never would have thought that. So when you say that there were literally like millions of versions that you were potentially handling, each of those would need to have their own set of metadata?
In many cases, yeah. So what happens is it seems simple. You get a product, you check in all the files, and there's probably 3,000 to 4,000 files for it, and then that's just one product. And then there's the documentation that goes with it, and then there's the financial statements if they're keeping them in there, and then there's other little bits and pieces. And each one, if it's done right, has information that goes along with it. Every one of them has a time, date stamp. Every one of them could potentially have they have a change list number that's associated with them. And then on top of that, I, myself as the admin or the engineers or whomever could add more data to this. It could be the label for this was a build. It could be label for this was my view on this date. So there is just, it's kind of mind-boggling when you stop and think of how exponential the amount of metadata that can be added. But thankfully, that metadata is only in K. You're talking about maybe 6K worth of information or 10K worth of information to provide this. So you're not sucking up too much. You're not sucking up huge quantities as quickly of disk space. And that's where Perforce really kind of hit the market and ran with it, is that they were scalable. They grew quickly, but they didn't overtake your server overnight.
Again, that is so interesting that there is such a heavy LAS aspect to the software world. I never would have thought that, and metadata being a popular course here in FLIS, that's really interesting to know that our skills are even useful in that region of the job sector. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Melissa? Go ahead, Frank.
I'm sorry. This topic's really interesting to me because I did actually work in an engineering company for a while. I was curious. You were talking about the branching, Melissa, and sometimes you can have multiple lines going at the same time. So does the software help you sort of, as say changes are incorporated into one line, those changes maybe need to be integrated into other branches? Does the software facilitate you being able to do that?
There are a couple of ways that it helps with that. One, it can provide us a visual. Some of the tools don't provide it or they charge extra for it, but Perforce actually has what they call Perforce Visual. So it will map out the lines that we currently have running, because you can end up with a lot of lines. And actually the last company I started at, they had some really nasty habits that had kind of become embedded, where they were just branching and branching and branching. So you would create a branch for a release, and then they'd create a branch for a bug, and then they'd create a branch for a bug on a bug, and then a branch for a bug on a bug. And as you can imagine, that tree got ugly really quick, and what they weren't doing were integrating those fixes back down into the main code line. So you'd fix something, and then down in main, where all the new development was going on, you'd have the same bug because nobody was checking in. So what you end up doing is Perforce had some scripts. There are a lot of user boards and whatnot where people share stuff, and you can search back up for these changes through Perforce, but you can actually add on scripts that will force check-ins to these branches to be integrated back down into your main branch, which is the most important thing that you want to do, because you don't want your information being lost. It'd be like shelving a book that goes on shelf A down at shelf C and hoping that somebody finds it someday somewhere. And you know, oftentimes they didn't. Right after, like 6 months after we'd been there, myself and another build engineer, we went through, and you almost needed to go out and have a beer afterwards, because there was so much that had not gone from all these children branches, these, as we called them, orphan children branches, that had never come back down into mainline. And that's money lost. That's money you've spent to fix something and assign an engineer to fix that's never come back down into main, which means it's never been tested. And that's bad. That's really bad. And it further erodes people's trust in your product, because that means you're just continuing to release junk. And as the person in charge of watching this information and managing it, it's your job to look for this. And you know, a good software shop will look for this. A bad software shop will just let it go. But you are the information architect. You're the one that's got to architect what's going on in that line. You've got to be the one that stands up and says, whoa, you know, we're losing info, we're losing our metadata, we're losing all this stuff, we've got to get it back.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments for Melissa?
So Melissa, did you do this with a tech background or something else? I'm sorry, because it seems so librarian-like, which is why I'm asking. And only today I read a post from a librarian which said that the engineers should not be doing this, but they should be giving this job to the librarians because they make things bad. So I don't mean to offend anyone, but I didn't realize it was a real problem out there.
So build-in release engineers are some of the most hated people in software companies. Right there behind IT. Because engineers, it's kind of like having a librarian sitting there going, you can't take that book out until you show me your library card. You can't bring me that book back until you tell me that you didn't mark it up and highlight all the pages and want to put it back in. You are the gatekeeper. And oftentimes engineering departments go, oh, we can build it, we can do it. We don't need, you know, the old joke, we don't need no stinking build engineer. But the truth is that you need to be in charge of that information. Case in point, the company I went to, they couldn't build what you call clean. They were building what you call a dirty sandbox, which means they hadn't built fresh in months. And there were all these hidden little gotchas and all these hidden directories, so they didn't even know how to build their own product on a clean machine. That's a big deal. You can't reproduce your build on a clean machine. You're a librarian. You can't produce books from the back that haven't been chewed on by somebody or highlighted in because you've just been letting garbage out and garbage in. Librarians, believe it or not, have a bigger aptitude for doing a lot of the work in software as we become more technical. Now, for those librarians who stay with their card catalogs and never get technical, the information that they possess is useless. But not useless, but it's useless in the form of moving into document places like Recall or EMC or anywhere else like that. But as you as librarians, or you as information architects, or myself as a MARA student, as we further grasp a hold of the technical side of what's going on in the world, and then take these basic constructs that we've learned about information and metadata and tagging and cataloging and all this, and put that on the processes out there and the businesses available, we have a lot to say. We have a big voice. But that's my 2 cents, and I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for answering all of these great questions. it's great to hear the presentation, and even better to be able to follow up and ask you more about what you've talked about. It's such an interesting topic. I know I've been really interested listening to all of this. It's been a brand new topic for me, and maybe others here listening as well. Before we close, what I'd like to do is go back to the introduction that we had at the beginning of the meeting, because a few new attendees have joined us mid-meeting, and I'd like to give themselves an opportunity to introduce themselves briefly before we close our meeting. So Hillary, would you be willing to briefly introduce yourself to us?
Sure. My name is Hillary Henkin. I am just starting my 3rd year at SLIS, and I came in hoping to become an archivist, but the whole records management, information science, greater world really fascinates me. And so we'll see what happens.
Thanks for introducing yourself, Hillary. I'm so glad that you came and checked out our meeting tonight. Joy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Joy Rodriguez, and I'm just starting my 4th year in the program. My first 2 years, I only took 1 class a semester because I have young children at home and stuff. But anyway, so most of my classes have been in the information, I think, description and organization area. I love cataloging, vocabulary design, and I'm taking the seminar in metadata right now. And yeah, my oldest is 12. That's the really painful child. But what was I going to say? Anyway, so that's where my interests lie, and I just joined this group over the summer, and I'm hoping to learn more about the different areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Joy. It's great to meet you, and I'm really glad that you attended our meeting tonight. And Lori, would you like to introduce yourself?
Lori just said she has no mic, so she's typing in. Oh, but she did say she's joining ASIS&T too, and I think she'd make a great addition to our group. I hope it's okay I'm talking for you, Lorraine.
Oh, that's wonderful that you're gonna join our student chapter, Lori. I'm happy to hear that. Thanks for introducing yourself on the chat window, and no problem about the mic. Okay, so I believe those are all the new members that came into the meeting. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say before we close the meeting?
Becky asked a question in the chat window about verifying student status.
Patricia can answer that. She's the membership director.
Sorry, I was realized I didn't have some people on the attendance. What did I miss?
Becky's question in the chat window regarding who to contact about verifying our student status.
Oh, Dr. Ursh. You know, on our website there's a join page, and so there you have some details how to go about your membership. And one of it says that after you send in your membership to ASIS, send Dr. Hirsch a message asking her to verify you as a student. And please do ask Dr. Hirsch and not your regular faculty advisors. Some students have been doing that, and then things get stuck up.
And to answer Becky's second question, no, actually what you do is you fill out the form on the ASIS website, And after you submit the form, you will receive a little direction on the screen telling you that you need to contact your advisor to have them send an email to ASIS verifying that you are indeed a member, a student at SJSU. And then on our website, we ask that you also CC that email that you send to Dr. Hirsch to our student chapter email address so that we are aware that you have applied for membership and so that we can then add you to our D2L site for student members. Lori, your student membership is good for 1 year, so it would, when it expires, that's when you would no longer be a student. Well, when you graduate, you are then technically no longer an ASIS student member, but your membership that you got at the student price would last for the full year, even though you have graduated. Diane, can you post the email address of our group in the chat window for Becky? Are there any other questions about membership from any of our new attendees tonight? Okay, so and I'd just like to say, Becky, all of this information is also on our website, on the page that says how to join. And so I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight, and we had a great meeting, and I will talk to you all at the next meeting. Thank you, and good night.
Sarah, there was one email that you sent me about the Google list. Was it an email? Was it on a discussion forum? I can't find it.
Do you mean about the Google form for the members database?
Maybe we should stop the recording.
Okay. Hang on.